Welcome back to another episode of Bossy, Brilliant, and Badass. I'm Lisa Lindsay here with my courageous co-host, Liz Green. Hey, Liz.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Hey. I'm good. It's Sunday morning.
Yeah.
We don't usually
Early.
tell when we record, but it's early. Boy, yeah, so I am feeling it. And I have not had any coffee. So, there you go.
Ooh, that's a toughie without starting podcasting and not having any coffee. And we have a couple happening today. So hopefully you'll be able to get your coffee fixed.
Oh, no, I'm running out. I'm glad this one ended early. So question for you. When was a time that you had to have a hard conversation with someone? How did you approach it?
Oh boy. Okay, so are we talking about work or personal?
I mean, I think you could take it wherever you want, but if work is safer, well, we could say in the safe space of work. Because the personal ones are usually always like pretty
Well, I was
hard, right?
gonna say personally, it's been like, a few days because I'm married.
Yes, you are.
Always trying to have those, always trying to have that communication in the marriage. But yeah, when I think about professionally, I would have to say, maybe about a couple of months ago, I had to have kind of a tough conversation with a client, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so without divulging too much, it was just a situation where there was kind of some changes that needed kind of to happen on my end for whatever reason. And sometimes for us as entrepreneurs, that can look like anything, I think, from financial stuff to whatever. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so we had the conversation and it went really, really well. But it was
Lead up,
scary.
right? Mm-hmm. The lead up. Yeah. And I think
What
that's
about you?
Yeah, for me, so I'm always having to have tough conversations with clients, right? Because for some reason or the other, and really relationships start off well. And because of the kind of work that I do, it's very easy to get entrenched in organizational politics and their drama. And part of the reason why I work externally is because I am not, nope, not interested. So it's
Right.
always a very kind of a very interesting thing to try to have those conversations. And there's always a little bit of fear around having those conversations because
Sure.
you don't want to piss off the client in a way. Like that's always my concern. I'm like, oh God, I don't want to piss them off, right? Because I
Right.
need this thing, but we've got to get our needs met, right? So it's sort of like this. If something's no longer working for you, then it has to happen. But it's always worry about losing the client, losing like you said, it's financial, right? Something needs to change financially, or something needs to change in the schedule, or something needs to change about how the work is being completed or the partnership. And having those conversations always feel like very, very fraught.
Right. And they're
like
hard.
Danger.
They're hard conversations. And just kind of knowing that it can feel scary and they are hard, but it's needed,
Necessary.
or else we're going to just carry it with us, and then it's just going to come out sideways, and then things are going to blow up and be it's worse.
100%. So that's kind of it. And that really is I wanted to ask that question because I think as entrepreneurs, sometimes we'll get corporate coaches who work in the corporate space here. It always feels like what they're talking about doesn't apply to us. And it's sort of like, yeah, it applies to us as entrepreneurs as well. Even if we're solo in our organization, because once we're having relationships with other people, right? Because there's no perfection, because there's no perfect people. So something is always going to go a little upside down, and you're going to need to right side it. And sometimes that's going to take the courage and conviction of having a conversation.
Right. And just knowing it probably is not going to go perfectly. I mean, great if it does, but it might not. And that's okay too.
And sometimes it's just it's the fear, right? It's just the fear of what we think might happen versus what actually, 'cause how many times have you worried about a conversation and you've gone into it, and once you started the conversation, the other person's like, yeah, sure, I get it. I understand. No problem. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, that's always great, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And you've spent days or weeks going,
Like
ah.
worried.
Yeah,
Like, oh my
exactly.
God, yeah.
Exactly. So just I think that's it. Just taking the step to have the conversation. But that brings us nicely into our conversation with Betsy Kauffman today,
Mhm.
who has a TED Talk about the 4 ways to have honest conversations at work. And really, I think her tips are not just about work; they're about life as well. What do you think?
Oh, I agree 100%. You can use these tips. They're so fantastic. I can't even wait for people to hear, but you can use these tips in your personal relationships as well.
So, Betsy's a globally recognized leadership and organizational agility coach. She has 20 years of experience working in Fortune 500 companies, and she is the owner of Cross Impact Coaching, which she started 8 years ago. And she tells us the story of how she even got started. So, um, go ahead and take a listen. Betsy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here this morning and talk about all the awesome things that go on with women and their businesses and entrepreneurship. And I just think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. So thanks, Liz and Lisa, for having me.
Yes,
Absolutely.
welcome, Betsy.
So I wanted to, we normally don't get into personal stories very much here on the show, but I was taking a look at yours and I was like, okay, somebody told you should quit your job after seeing you speak at a meetup, and you did. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I've been in corporate America for quite some time, and I was actually doing a meetup. And I had a gentleman approach me at the very end. He actually waited. It was really fun because I think it was my first speaking event, and the room was filled, and I had a long line afterwards. And he waited to the very end of the meetup to come and talk to me. And he said, you need to quit your day job and take this show on the road." And I did. So, I didn't do it like immediately that day, but I gave it, about a month, probably quicker than most people, and thought about it. And I decided that I did want to leave the safety and security of corporate America and start my own company. And so that was 8 years ago. And it's been a fun, exciting, challenging roller coaster of events.
Yes.
Super cool.
Yeah. Running a business and taking that leap is always very hard, which is why I wanted to ask you about that, because, um, some of us hear that all the time, to go ahead and like quit, or we're thinking it and we don't ever do it. So like taking the leap and what inspires us to take the leap is pretty critical sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes, what you did, Betsy, is you made that leap quite quickly within a month.
Mhm.
And do you think that sometimes that's the key, rather than kind of just continue to let it roll around in your head and then eventually you kind of just stay where you are?
Yeah, I think it's tough, right? That's a tough call because everybody's situation is a little bit different. I've been thinking about it probably for some time, maybe like unconsciously or subconsciously behind the scenes, like, do I really want to stay here? But I think if you are at a point where you're like, I need to do something different and I'm ready to make that jump, make sure you have your ducks in a row, which, financially, and that you can make it work. You've got you understand your process. It's not going to be easy. And then do it. And I think right now we're at a lot of folks, we've spent 2 years at home, right, and working, and we've seen a lot of folks start to leave their companies and start to think about what's next. And I think we're at a really great time where we're going to see just so much more entrepreneurship. And even if they're just working a side hustle and they work that side hustle to a certain point and they say, okay, now it's time for me to take that leap of faith. But I think it's a phenomenal time to see these great new businesses popping up. I don't know what you guys think. Have you seen that as well in your?
No, I agree with that. And I think I said that at the very beginning of the pandemic. Maybe not right at the beginning, once we started to see it stretch out. I know I've said on this podcast a couple of different times that we're going to see a lot of businesses like pop up, because it was easy to see once we got into month 6 and 7 and we're getting to year 1. It was sort of like, okay, yeah, people are going to start to reevaluate. And probably was because I was reevaluating, right? And so I always assume, I mean, I don't know if it's ego or not. I assume if I'm doing something, a lot of other people are doing it as well, right? Because I'm not like super special in that way. But if I'm thinking something, somebody else must be thinking it too. And the world has millions in it. So I sort of expected it. And then to see this last year, what we're calling the Great Resignation or reshuffle or shift or whatever term we want to use, I see a lot of people coming out of corporate America and then really trying to do something for themselves because they want different things in their life, which makes sense. I mean, a pandemic will do that to you. I mean, this is my first one. I hope it's my only.
Right. I was just going to say, yeah, it'll do that to you. And yeah, for most of us, it's our first one. But yeah, that's so true, isn't it? I've spoken to so many female entrepreneurs along in the past couple of years, and they have all said the same thing, right? Like, well, it gave me time to really sit back and really kind of evaluate where my life is at. And I've had this idea for a while, and maybe it's time to do it.
Right.
So absolutely.
I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're going to get into kind of your topic of conversation today, which I know you have a TED Talk related to it, but we're going to be talking to you about it today. So, we still want the TED Talk views, but so it's about having honest conversations at work, and you have some tips which you would like to share with our audience. But before we get into that, why is it important? Why is this something that you wanted to talk about? What caused you to see this as a need for something to be discussed and known to people?
Yeah, so I'm an organizational design coach and a leadership coach. And at the time when I was getting ready to submit the talk, I was working in an organization, and I had several clients within that same organization say to me, "I just wish I could say that out loud. I just wish I could say this, in the room instead of, behind the scenes." And being the fact that I work in a lot of large organizations as an entrepreneur, right, as a consultant, I see that all the time, right? I see a lot of we are afraid to have these honest conversations and to bring them out. And as you kind of step back, it's not just the large organizations, it's actually like in life and in general. And so when I submitted that, I just felt like it was such an important topic. I didn't think it would get picked because it isn't anything that's like earth shattering or groundbreaking or like all the new ideas, that TED loves to bring out. But it's funny, they selected me because they said it's such a topic that is so needed and critical that they felt like it was important to share that message. And so it was fun. It was an amazing experience, but it's funny because it actually released in January of 2021, but it continues to get traction. I continue to get asked for additional conversations. I run workshops on it. So it's just, it is such a critical, I think, for us to navigate both personally and professionally. How do we have these conversations? How do we bring up some of the tough stuff? And I think it's critical for anybody in self-development.
Yes, absolutely. And as soon as you said that, one of my first thoughts is, well, how do we even start to do that? Say we have a thought in our head and we know part of us wants to really bring it up and talk about it. But I imagine there's a lot of fear around that as well.
Yeah, that's funny. That's actually the first tip, is to have the confidence and the courage, right? Because that's where it stems from. For us to be able to speak up and say anything, it's first you have to have that confidence, that courage to say, okay, I have something to say and I want to say it, and I'm not going to hold it inside. Because how often do we hold these things, like we run them through our head over and over again because we don't want to, we're afraid of the repercussion of putting it out there, right? Or it maybe not be the right time, or we don't work in an environment that allows us to have those types of conversations. So it is about confidence and courage. And that's the first step of the first tip in the 4 tips for sure.
Right. And do you
see that from a confidence, courage perspective, just in general, like when you want to speak up and say something?
Yes.
Well, absolutely. I mean, because there are so many things that drive us, right? In terms of how particularly if there's something we want to say that we think might be bad, right? We always sit and ruminate in our heads about how somebody might take this, or if they will understand what we're trying to say to them, or if they're going to be offended, or if you're talking even in a corporate environment, is it even my place to say this, right? Because depending on the culture of your organization. So there's so many things that drive that sort of fear and cause us to kind of keep our mouths shut when there's something really important that needs to be said. And I've seen it play out in so many circumstances where just having the confidence. I remember one, Liz, you were in this class. I don't remember if you remember it at all, but I remember it because the instructor pointed it out to me. It was a group coaching course that we're taking when we're at NYU. She had put us in groups for this first activity. And it was to choose 5 words or something like that. I don't remember what it was. And the group as a whole chose some words that didn't apply to me. And we were going through our words or whatever the case may be. And I remember just kind of sitting there. She asked us a question and whatever. And I remember going, well, that one doesn't apply to me. And then all of a sudden there was this chorus of, yeah, these words don't apply to me. And these words don't apply to me, and that kind of thing. And I remember her coming to me after and saying, hey, thanks for speaking up. That's leadership.
Right.
Because notice what happened when everybody else,
and
after you piped up.
Yeah.
So true. I remember that moment, Lisa, and that really sticks out in my brain because I know we were sitting beside one another and she had put something all over the floor. And and you said, none of these apply to me. And everyone's just like, frozen silence in the room. And I'm looking at you going, wow, man, that is ballsy. And the teacher said, well, what does apply to you? She's a really good instructor. And so then you started sharing, and then that gave the rest of us kind of like the courage to step up and say, there's not a word for me either. And this is my word, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was definitely leadership. What do you think about that, Betsy?
Well, it's funny because that's usually is the case. And I think, Lisa, you said this in the very beginning, like if I'm thinking it or I'm feeling this way, probably somebody else's, if not everybody in the room, right? So that is being able to step up and say something. I think 9 times out of 10, you'll be, yeah, I kind of agree, or, oh yeah, I'm on the same page with you, right? But having that courage to say it is half the battle, right? And I think when you can find that, you'll find that you do have others in the same situation. Like, yeah, I agree with you. So that is true leadership. That's amazing.
I wonder what you think about how power or the power dynamics of who is in the room impact our ability to have those conversations, right? Because as entrepreneurs, I think we might find difficulty having conversations with our clients, right? Because we still, depending on what that power dynamic is, and sometimes I think depending on what our needs are as the entrepreneur, because if you feel like, look, I need this client and I really need the money that they're paying me for whatever, depending on the stage of the relationship, you might find it difficult to say something versus if you're kind of like, okay, client, listen, this is really going to impact you in a positive, negative, whatever way. And I need to say this to you because I'm the expert, or however you view yourself in that relationship. Because corporate, it's easy to find it, right? I know that one of the things that I learned when I was in the corporate environment is that as the manager and head of the department, whatever, never speak first. Because when you speak first and you share your opinion, your direct reports more than likely are just going to agree with you and they're not going to say anything contrary. Right. So that was one of my lessons. So I just was thinking, okay, that power dynamic might be at play as well for just having the courage. So what do you do? What do you think about that? And what do you do with it?
Yeah, we see it all the time, right? Especially as entrepreneurs, and if you're working with a client and you want to make sure that you don't ruffle their feathers, or you're afraid to say something. I actually think part of what has made me so successful is that I do say in what I see and what I'm hearing. And, while it may not be the most, like flowery, rainbowy thing in the room, sometimes they actually appreciate it. And so they come back and say, thank you so much for saying that. Thank you for being honest. This is why we value you as our partner in this work. But I think that takes the courage, again, and the confidence to know who you are as an entrepreneur and being able to put yourself out there. And when you're getting going, I think that becomes those boundaries that you have to start to learn how to create, right? So, so where, like, what kind of clients do I want to work with? Am I comfortable speaking up and speaking out? Am I comfortable potentially losing a client if we maybe don't align on a great, on our topics or what we believe in? And I think, that is, it's a hard one for us to master, especially as women, but I think it is also critical to be able to have that confidence. And there is a power dynamic. And by working in corporate America, there's a cultural thing too behind it from does the company respect this? Does my manager respect me speaking out? Right. But I find that being able to find yourself and finding that having that voice is really critical.
Yeah, and what's super interesting around that is I have a client, and she's very high level in a pharmaceutical company. And what she said to me, and I thought this was so interesting, is she said, when we have our meetings, she said, people just assume the leaders are the ones that speak the most. She said, even if it's a bunch of crap and the rest of us know it, we just gravitate towards the ones that speak the most. And we think, we kind of follow them. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting.
It is. It is. When I facilitate sessions with leaders, I always have the head leader, right, whoever it is, speak last. So if I'm running around robin, I'll actually go around the room, and I let the leader know that ahead of time to say, I'm going to call on you last, because I want everybody else to have their opinion out there, and not, like you said, Lisa and Liz, to your point, whenever they speak first, everybody just kind of follows suit because of the hierarchy and the dynamic.
The power dynamic existing. That is one of like my greatest tips that I share with people all the time. And I do it. I just say exactly what you said there, Betsy, is just, I'll say to the leader, if they're in the room, hey, I'm going to have you go last. And that just really creates the space for everybody to feel comfortable, because you're already telling them, hey, I want you to be heard. So it's essentially, I'm going to say this in a weird way, but it's essentially silencing that voice that sometimes might create fear in you. Right. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So finding the courage and that's not always easy. That's not always the thing to do, but just sometimes just finding the way to do it. I wonder if this gets into your second tip or not, but sometimes it's sort of like, do I know how to say it? Right. Because I think sometimes people don't know how to say the thing, or they think this thing is going to be particularly tricky, and they have the courage. And the only way I know how to say it is to just say it, and it's going to come out ugly. Right. And I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, so that's tip 2 and 3 combined. So we'll kind of talk through them. So tip 2 is understanding your intent, right? What is it that you want to make sure that you're not just speaking to speak, because as, like, I hate to say this, but as women, sometimes we do just chatter on, right? And we're not, we really struggle with bottom lining what we're trying to say. So tip 2 is understand the intent. And then tip 3 is don't sugarcoat it, know the facts, and speak with really factual, as opposed to having it be emotional. Right. So it's a combination of those two. But yeah, super. And I think, ways to have it land. One, we always want it to land perfectly, but it's not going to. Right. And so if I'm getting ready to actually speak and it's a critical situation, I know it's going to be critical, I'll probably play it in my head a little bit to say, okay, what do I want to say? How do I want it to land? What is, you've got to also be empathetic if it's going to land maybe not so well and it's directed towards an individual. I do in my coaching practice, I practice with my clients quite a bit. Like, how do you want to say that? Like, and it's funny, when I do my speaking and my keynote speeches, I actually I say them out loud all the time. So when I can hear my voice, I don't know if you guys, like, and when you can hear your voice and when you can hear what you're going to say, it's easier to let it, like, come out. Like if you're asking your client for, hey, I want to renew our statement of work. This is what I'm looking for. Like, rehearse it out loud. Think about what you want to say to your client, and make sure you can hear yourself and be like, oh wait, that doesn't sound right. That didn't come out right. Right. So I think
because you can adjust.
Art and science trying to get that to come out and land right, for sure.
Yeah, I like that, saying it out loud and then kind of, figuring that out. What I sometimes will do with my clients, and this is a bit of psychodrama that I bring in, is I just do a role reversal. I have them say it, I write it down, and then I say it back to them as though they are the other person. I'm like, what does that sound like? How does that land? And then we kind of adjust back and forth until it feels comfortable. I want to say this and I want it to land this way. And how do we hear that out loud? So that's great.
That's a great tip. I actually love that. I'll probably take that with me and put that in my box.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I like that, because what we're talking about here is the intention, and you're saying that that's tip 2, like, what is your intent? And I find that, so I'm a pretty direct person, so I find that I actually say those words. Look, my intention here is to da 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 da. To be clear, is to get this, is to get that, right? So that I'm always prefacing, and that was one of my when I was doing my master's, I think, one of my, again, instructors said the same thing to me. She said, sometimes, Lisa, you just have to name the thing, right? And that's how I kind of picked that up. So it's sort of like you preemptively name the thing. So if there's a thing that you're kind of worried about, just kind of name it and say, hey, here's the thing. So that's kind of my tip about the intention, is just for me to just say, look, my intention here is not to piss you off. It really is just da 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 da. And I don't really know if I'm going to say it the right way. I'm going to use the right words, but my goal at the end of this is that we get to clarity, or we get to agreement, or we can move forward effectively, or whatever. I don't know. That's more conflict based, I'm thinking, but yeah.
When you actually lead with that maybe even softens it if it doesn't get delivered right
Perfectly, yeah.
in the perfectly way, because we're going to mess that up. And I think if you say, okay, here's my intent, this is the purpose, this is what I want, this is why I'm saying this, that may help them, because like, okay, I get it, I understand where we're trying to go with the conversation. So definitely, I love that for sure.
Yeah. So what are your tips around that? I mean, I think Liz and I shared ours, but what are your tips around like intention, and really making sure that you understand what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you say something, you want to have this conversation out there, you need to know exactly, like, it's here to move a conversation or a relationship or a situation forward, right? So make sure that we're actually coming from that place of positivity, and that we're trying to improve whatever it is, as opposed to, I'm just going to say something to see how they react, right? We've all seen those like mic drop moments, and people do those for effect, but really the whole goal of this is to make sure that we're trying to actually improve what's going on, and not just create that swirl in a room. And I don't know about you guys, but I've seen that all the time, where people just,
well, yeah, because I think there's that part of people that want to be right.
Yeah.
And people, sometimes it will just keep going around in a circle, and then you don't even get to that end point.
Yeah. So as long as you've got that place of intent, and you really do want to make sure that you're moving the situation forward, right? That's what you've got to understand. Okay, I'm going to speak up. It is important for me to say this, because I want to make sure that we address whatever is going on, and I want to put the data and the facts out there, and not make it an emotional type of conversation, because that's another hard part, right? Is that sometimes it becomes emotional. So if we cannot sugarcoat it and just speak very plainly, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what's happening, right? It's going to actually be a much richer conversation, and you'll be able to have it'll move it forward, hopefully, if the other person's listening, right? That's not a tip, but that's, you've got to understand that too as well. For sure.
Right. Yeah. Because sometimes you could have all the best intentions, and if the other person is not there with you, then it doesn't matter what you say, how nicely you present it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sticking to the facts. I love that. I like that. Yeah. Really sticking to the facts.
Yeah.
Right. Which is your third tip, right? The facts.
Yeah. Don't sugarcoat it. Speak to the facts. And I think, sometimes if it is something heated, and we don't, do well with that type of confrontation or conversation, we can get emotional. Right. We can actually bring the emotions into that. And I'm guilty. I mean, no one's perfect here, but I can always tell when those emotions are rising, because I can feel it inside of me. But if you can bring and you have very factual information as to what's going on, it doesn't always have to be numbers and data. Right. I mean, that's, it's, if it makes sense to have numbers and data, but it's more about like, what are you, like I said, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? Like, what is currently situation there? And it's, you can deliver it in a very nice, calm manner. It's going to actually land better, and be able to be received better, for sure.
Yeah, well, and that's like a little coaching tip, right? Like where we talk about, well, this is what I'm hearing. This is what, if I'm hearing you correctly, this is how it's coming across to me, right? So well, I think it's both coaching and therapeutic tip as well, right? Like where you're sort of saying, let me repeat that back to you, kind of like what you're saying, Liz, so you can kind of hear how it sounds, I hear how it's coming to me, so that manages down the emotion. And I think I agree with you, like just the idea of practicing it all the time, of repeating it to yourself, saying it out loud, really does take the emotion away. I mean, I know that I have had a conversation recently where I wrote down word for word what I wanted to say, and then just kind of repeated it to myself first, and read it and repeated it before I said anything. And really, I was so, when I heard myself speaking it later, I was like, oh, wait, I sound like a robot and I have no emotion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you obviously
like, hang on, let me get my list. All right. So
yeah, hold on. I'm going
Right.
to exactly what I'm thinking. No, it's, it's funny because we don't not want to have emotion, right? That's what makes us
Right.
so human. It makes us want to work with each other, but it is about, not being emotional during
Right.
that conversation. So yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know, I tend to think, and women sometimes get a little bit more emotional depending on what's happening. It's just the nature of who we are. Not everybody, I mean, but typically we see those emotions rise a little bit more than where our male counterparts can probably, like, I don't know if they're trained as young men to like keep the emotions down, right? But I think, as a
Right.
woman, that will make you more successful in being able to speak really factually and calm and clear and concise.
yeah. So any tips around, I know we talked about it a little bit. So let's say I'm starting to feel heated up. I have my list, I said, but I don't, what I'm getting back is unexpected, right? And it's somehow stirring me up.
Mhm.
How can I kind of get back to a place of calmness in
Yeah,
that moment?
it's one identifying it in yourself. At what point did I get triggered, right? Am I triggered at this point?
Mhm.
Um, take, sometimes just stop. Don't stop talking, right? Because I don't know about you all, but sometimes when you start to get emotional and it's not landing, we actually start talking more. So taking a step back, when we're virtual, you can just like sit back, take a deep breath. There's a couple of exercises. I don't know if you guys have gone through the positive intelligence stuff, but you can actually like do where you take your two fingers and you rub them together. That'll kind of as like a soothing thing to say, okay, how do I take a deep breath? How do I recollect myself? How do I listen to what's happening in the situation and not get myself back wrapped into it, right? So it's one, identifying that trigger point, taking a deep breath, sitting back, stepping back, listening, and just kind of regrouping like internally before you head back into it. Because I know when I'm in a heated conversation, I can sometimes get so deep in it that I can't even take the time to just like, okay, pause, regroup like yourself.
Mhm.
And we stop listening. I mean, even if we're trying to speak, we will sometimes stop listening ourselves because we're just trying, at that point, the conversation has shifted and we're trying to get our point across, right? So really just take some time to regroup. And I don't know if you all have other tips that you've found to be successful, but that's typically what I like to do.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Liz.
Go ahead. Well, what I like to do, I like the self-regulation tip there. What I like to do is I'll just write down, if I'm starting to get heated up, I'll just kind of get it out of my body and write it down. All right, a couple of words, this is what I'm feeling. And somehow I'm able to kind of separate out from that and just kind of, okay, that's how I'm feeling. All right, take a deep breath, pause. All right, then I'm more available to listen again.
Yeah, I agree with you on this whole, like, you stop listening, because I know I stopped listening, sort of like, because all of my time and attention and energy is now focused inward to stop me from maybe rolling my eyes in the small instance, which is not going to be good.
Right.
Or to lose it completely. So it's sort of like, because my brain is now focused on all that stuff. And if I ever kind of catch myself in that space, it's one of two things that will happen. I'll say, okay, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? Let me make sure I understand. That's a tip to kind of get me back into listening, because I realized I wasn't listening. Or if it's just so bad, I'm saying, okay, you know what? Let's just time out. Let's just stop here. Because I'm not sure I'm hearing what you want me to hear. So it might just be best for us to come back to this. When can we come back? And then your body is now, my brain is now focused on something else. It's focused on a very practical activity of like setting a time. If it's in a work situation, so setting a time to have another conversation with somebody, versus I've now stepped out of the conflict, assuming it's a conflicting situation, right?
Yeah, I think, sometimes that may be the best, right? Being able to identify, okay, this isn't going to be, we're not going to come to a good place right now. So maybe we do need to just pause it and come back to it. It's funny because that actually leads us into step 4, which is always try to seek a resolution, right?
Yep.
So make sure that we have the confidence, we have the positive intent, we know what we're trying to accomplish, we don't sugarcoat it, but then we are also bringing resolution and opening up the door to say, okay, now how do we solve for this? Here are some ideas. So again, it goes back to this, it's great to put these things out there, but also make sure that you have potential options to at least start the conversation, right? Because it may not land the way you want it to from a resolution, but at least if you come on and say, hey, we could do it this way, or this way, then the conversations and the ideas start to flow. And I think if you are at a heightened sense, right, that might actually bring down the whatever's happening in that conversation. Say, okay, let's really turn this to think about how do we solve for this at this time.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think that is probably, when I think about the tips, right? I think the first and the last one they all matter, of course, but the first and the last one are like the ones that are resonating the most for me, which is have the courage, but also come with a resolution. So it's sort of like, well, I'm not just here having this conversation, like you keep saying, Betsy, to have this conversation just so that we could talk for talking's sake. It's sort of like, well, what outcome do we want anyway at the end of all of this? Right. And what is the solution here? So if I'm bringing this up, a lot of times we bring things up because it makes us feel bad, or we feel weird, but I'm going to just say, okay, so what? Right.
And then nothing happens. And then it kind of still percolates and just sits there on the surface, right? Until either it comes up again, or then we just kind of tamper it down, which happens quite a bit in organizations and even in small, companies. So like as an entrepreneur, I have a small team that supports me, and we have these same types of things. Like we have to actually have tough conversations and decide what do we want to do. And if something's not working out with a team member, right, that happens, as not only just in the large corporations, they happen all the time. So I think that, all these tips can be useful in any type of situation, whether you're working in corporate America, whether you have a small team as an entrepreneur, whether you're trying to work with a client and negotiate, or just, help them negotiate something, right? You can actually take these and apply it to them as well.
Yeah, nobody's exempted just because you might be alone. Once you're dealing with people, you're dealing with all of these things, and having honest conversations are really critical and really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So Betsy, before we let you go, is there do you have one big takeaway that you have for our audience before we let you go?
Oh gosh. I think it comes down to knowing yourself, right? Knowing who you are and what you're trying to create as an entrepreneur, and having those boundaries, right? So understanding like, okay, this is what I want, whether it's, from a client perspective, from, within your team, within your company, how you want to operate. And so, that would be my big takeaway, and using the tips to support you in that manner.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Wonderful. Excellent tips, Betsy. I just love it. All right. So where can people find you?
Crossimpactcoaching.com. Our website has a ton of information on it about who we are. We do one-on-one leadership coaching, we do team development, and we do organizational design. And then you can always link in with me, and we're always putting some really good content with more tips and just how to navigate. I work with a lot of corporate clients, and so how to help the corporate clients navigate the workforce and the culture and all the craziness that's happening currently in the world. So those are going to be the best places.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for being our badass of the week.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I love being a badass.